The breakfast room at Stonebridge Park faced east, and at 6:30 on an October morning, the light was barely more than a suggestion, a thin wash of gray gold that touched the tops of the elms beyond the terrace and left the room itself to the fire and the candles on the sideboard. The table had been laid for one, as it was laid every morning: white linen, the Stonebridge silver, a rack of toast beneath a cloth, preserves in cut glass, and the coffee service set precisely at the left end of the sideboard where Mrs. Cope had always kept it, and where the current Duchess had seen no reason to move it. The woman standing at the sideboard was not dressed as a duchess. She wore a plain gray muslin day dress, high-waisted and unadorned, with a fichu of white cotton tucked into the bodice and her dark hair pinned simply beneath a linen cap. She was checking the temperature of the coffee pot with one hand laid flat against its side, a gesture so practiced it had become instinctive, and adjusting the position of the cream jug with the other. She did this every morning. She had done it every morning for 8 months. The door opened behind her and she heard boots, not the soft indoor shoes of a footman, but heavy outdoor boots, still carrying the particular sound of gravel from the drive. She did not turn. Visitors at 6:30 were not visitors. They were household matters, and household matters she handled. Dominic Carver, Duke of Stonebridge, had not sent word ahead. The session in the House of Lords had concluded a fortnight earlier than expected. A bill on enclosure reforms had been tabled rather than debated, and 2 key votes had been moved to the new year, and he had left London the previous evening without writing to the House. 11 months of marriage had not, it seemed, established in him the habit of informing his wife of his movements. He had informed his valet. His valet was still in London, packing the remainder of his things, and would follow by post-chaise in 2 days. He came into the breakfast room as he always came into rooms, with the unhurried authority of a man who had been the Duke of Stonebridge since he was 23, and who had never, in all the years since, entered a room in his own house that was not already arranged for his comfort. The fire was lit, the table was laid, everything was precisely as it ought to be. He sat down in the chair at the head of the table, unfolded his newspaper, 3 days old. He had picked it up at the last coaching in, and looked toward the sideboard where a woman in gray was standing with her back half turned. "Bring me coffee," he said. "Black, no cream." The woman lifted the pot. She poured with the steady hand of someone who had poured 1,000 cups and could judge the fill by weight alone. She carried the cup and saucer to the table and set it down at his right hand, precisely where the saucer ring in the linen told her he preferred it, and straightened. He glanced up. She was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Her face was composed, entirely, perfectly composed, but there was something at the corners of her mouth that might have been, if he had been paying closer attention, amusement. She said nothing. She folded her hands at her waist and stood, as any well-trained servant would stand, waiting to see if anything further was required. He might have looked longer. He might have noticed that her hands, though reddened slightly from the morning cold, were not a housemaid's hands, the fingers too fine, the nails too carefully kept. He might have noticed that the gray dress, though plain, was cut from muslin of a quality no maid in any household could afford. He did not. He returned to his newspaper. The door from the corridor opened, and Mrs. Cope entered carrying the morning's post on a silver tray. She was a woman of 58 who had served Stonebridge Park for 31 years, and she had learned in that time to absorb a great deal without altering her expression. But when she saw them both, the Duke at the table with his newspaper, the Duchess standing at the sideboard with the coffee pot, her step faltered. The fraction of a pause was so brief that only someone who knew her well would have caught it. "Your Grace," she said, and she was not looking at the Duke. She was looking at Imogen. "I did not know you were expected this morning." The Duke lowered his newspaper. Mrs. Cope set the post on the table and turned to the woman at the sideboard with the careful deference she had shown her every day for 8 months. "Shall I have Aldous informed that his Grace has arrived, Your Grace?" The second, "Your Grace," landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Dominic Carver looked at the woman in gray. She met his gaze with the same composed, faintly amused expression. She inclined her head, not a curtsy, not a bow, but the precise inclination of a woman acknowledging something she had been waiting, without urgency, for someone else to discover. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said. "I trust the journey from London was not too uncomfortable." Her voice was not what he had expected. He had not, he realized with a sensation that was closer to vertigo than embarrassment, expected anything at all because he had not thought about her voice. He had married this woman 11 months ago through a proxy witnessed by solicitors. He had seen a portrait, a watercolor miniature sent by her father, a gentleman of moderate means in Somerset, showing a young woman with dark hair and an expression the artist had rendered as demure, but which he now suspected had been something else entirely. He had looked at the portrait once. He had placed it in his desk drawer. He had written to her 14 times about roof timbers, the quarterly accounts, a dispute with the parish boundary, and the drainage situation in the lower field. She had replied to every letter with precision, clarity, and not a single word he had not solicited. He stood. The chair scraped on the stone floor. He was aware, in the particular way that a man becomes aware of his own absurdity, that he had asked his wife to bring him coffee. "I should have sent word," he said. "You should have," she agreed, and there was no reproach in it. She spoke the way she did everything he would learn, with a directness that left no room for argument precisely because it carried no heat. She turned to Mrs. Cope. "We will need the rooms in the south wing aired, and Aldous should know before the tenants do. Mr. Ferris is expected at 10 about the Boundary Oak, and it would be better if he heard from us that his grace is in residence rather than from the village." Mrs. Cope nodded once and left. The efficiency of the exchange, the way it moved without hesitation from revelation to management, told Dominic something he was not yet prepared to fully absorb, that this house, his house, had been running for 8 months under an authority that was not his, and running well. He picked up his coffee. It was exactly the right temperature. The remainder of that first morning unfolded as a series of quiet discoveries, each one landing with the cumulative weight of evidence he had not known he was collecting. He walked the ground floor and found the library reorganized, not rearranged but catalogued, the volumes shelved by subject or before they had been shelved by the whim of whichever footman had last dusted them. A ledger on the library desk, open to the current week, showed a system of household accounts so methodical that he spent 10 minutes reading it before he understood what he was looking at. She had identified a pattern of overpayment to 2 separate suppliers and renegotiated the terms, saving the estate £43 per quarter. £43. He had not noticed because the quarterly summaries she sent to London had simply shown the corrected figures, as though the savings had always existed. In the east wing, he found the roof repair she had arranged. The timbers had been failing. He knew this. He had written to her about it in his 4th letter, asking her to consult with Aldous on estimates. What he had not known, because her reply had mentioned only the cost and the name of the carpenter, was that she had climbed to the attic herself, or rather, had stood at the base of the attic stairs while the carpenter climbed, and had understood from his description that the problem was not the timbers, but the lead flashing beneath them, which was older than the timbers and which no one had thought to check. The repair she had commissioned was half the cost of the one Aldous had originally proposed, and it had held through 2 months of autumn rain without a single leak. Aldous himself confirmed this when Dominic found him in the estate office after luncheon. The steward was a man of 60 who had served the previous duke with rigid loyalty, and who had regarded every subsequent instruction from London with the particular skepticism of a man who knows the land better than anyone who does not walk it daily. He had resisted the new Duchess for approximately 3 weeks. "Her Grace has an eye for the practical," Aldous said, which was, from Aldous, the equivalent of a 20-minute eulogy. "She does not interfere. She asks the right questions, and then she lets me do the work. It is a quality," he added, looking at the Duke over the top of his spectacles with an expression that was not quite insubordination, "that I have found valuable." Dominic heard the unspoken comparison and did not challenge it. He had, after all, spent 11 months sending instructions from London. She had spent 8 months here, on the ground, learning the names of the tenants and the temperament of the steward and the exact temperature at which the breakfast room coffee ought to be served. The difference was not flattering to him. He found her in the morning room after tea. She was writing a letter, to her sister, he would later learn, one of 4 sisters she wrote to weekly with a faithfulness that made his own 14 letters of estate business seem even more inadequate by contrast. She looked up when he entered and waited, with the same composed patience, for him to speak. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what, specifically?" She set down her pen. "The coffee, the 11 months, or the portrait you looked at once and put in a drawer?" He stared at her. "How did you know about the portrait?" "The drawer was unlocked when I arrived. The miniature was face down beneath a folio of correspondence. One does not need to be especially perceptive to draw a conclusion." She said this without bitterness, without, as far as he could detect, any emotional coloring whatsoever. It was an observation. She was a woman, he was beginning to understand, who observed a great deal and said very little about most of it, and the combination was more disarming than any accusation. "I looked at it more than once," he said, and did not know if it was true. "You did not," she said, "but it does not signify. I did not expect to be looked at." The quiet brutality of that sentence, "I did not expect to be looked at," stayed with him through dinner, through the evening, through the following morning when he came down early and found her again at the sideboard, again in gray, again checking the temperature of the coffee pot. She glanced at him. The faintest trace of that amusement crossed her face. "Shall I pour, Your Grace?" she asked. "I believe," he said, "that I can manage it myself." She stepped aside. He poured badly, too full, a splash in the saucer, and she handed him a cloth without comment. They stood together at the sideboard in a silence that was not yet comfortable but was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people discovering that they were in the same room. The days that followed settled into a pattern that was part negotiation, part education, and part something neither of them would have named aloud. He accompanied her on the weekly visit to the tenants and discovered that she knew not only their names but their children's names, their ailments, the state of their fences, and the progress of their winter planting. Mrs. Hayward at the home farm had a daughter with a cough that would not clear. Imogen had arranged for the apothecary in the village to send a preparation and had followed up twice. Old Ferris, whose boundary oak was the subject of the morning's appointment, had been in quiet dispute with the neighboring estate for 3 years. Imogen had located the original survey in the estate records and settled the matter in an afternoon. She did not perform these things for his benefit. That was what struck him most forcefully. She had not been waiting for his arrival to demonstrate her competence. She had simply been competent, daily and without witness, because the work needed doing and she was the one in a position to do it. His arrival had changed nothing about her routine. It had only given him the opportunity to see it. He asked her, on the 4th evening, about her family. They were sitting in the drawing room after dinner, she with her needlework, he with a book he was not reading, and the question emerged with the awkwardness of something that should have been asked 11 months ago. "My father is a gentleman of moderate estate near Taunton," she said, setting a stitch with the precision she brought to everything. "He has 5 daughters and no sons, which has been, I believe, the defining fact of his financial life. I am the second. My elder sister, Catherine, married a clergyman in Dorset. My younger sisters are not yet out. My mother died when I was 14, and I have managed my father's household since. I was not, I think, what your solicitors were looking for when they approached my father about the match. He has said very little on the subject, but I believe they were hoping for the eldest. Why not Catherine, then? Catherine was already engaged, and I was, by my father's assessment, the most likely to manage a large household without complaint." She looked up from her needlework and met his eye. He was correct. There was a quality to her self-knowledge that he found both admirable and slightly unnerving. She did not say these things as complaints. She did not say them as boasts. She stated them as facts, the way she stated everything, with the clean efficiency of a woman who had learned early that accuracy was more useful than sentiment. "Do you miss Somerset?" he asked. "I miss my sisters. I do not miss the house. It was cold, and the roof leaked rather worse than yours." He almost smiled. He was not, by temperament, a man who smiled easily. His years in the House of Lords and the years before that, managing an estate left tangled by his father's debts, had ground the reflex down to something that surfaced rarely and with effort. But she had a way of delivering a sentence that made the corners of his mouth move before his reserve could prevent it. "What did you think?" he asked, and then stopped, because the question felt like reaching into a drawer that had been locked and finding it already open. "When the solicitors came, when the arrangement was proposed, what did you think?" She considered this. The needle paused, not because she was uncertain, but because she was choosing her words with the same care she chose everything. I thought it was the most sensible decision available to me. My father's estate would not support 5 unmarried daughters indefinitely. Catherine had her clergyman. The younger girls needed time. I was 22 and had no other prospects of consequence, and the alternative was to remain at home and manage a household that was not mine until one of my sisters married someone willing to take me in. She resumed her stitching. I did not think of it as a sacrifice. I thought of it as a transfer of competence from one house to another. And when you arrived here and found it empty of me? I found it full of work, she said simply. That was enough. It has always been enough. She looked at him again, and this time the composure shifted, not cracked, never cracked, but thinned deliberately, like curtains drawn back to let in a measured quantity of light. I did not expect you to be here, Your Grace. I expected to manage. When your letters came about the roof and the drainage, I answered them because they were questions that had answers. I did not wait for you to ask anything else. The implication that he might have asked that there had been room in 14 letters for a single question about her health or her happiness or whether she found the library adequate settled over him like a draft from an ill-fitted window. Lady Prentice called on the 6th day. She arrived in a barouche with her companion, Mrs. Lacey, and was shown into the drawing room where Imogen was reviewing the household linen inventory with Mrs. Cope. Lady Prentice was a widow of 42, handsome, well-connected, and possessed of a neighboring estate that shared a boundary with Stonebridge along the river. She had known the previous duke. She had known Dominic since he inherited. She had watched the proxy marriage with the attentive interest of a woman who understood that a marriage conducted through solicitors and a pair of formal letters was not, in any meaningful sense, a marriage at all. "My dear Duchess," she said, taking Imogen's hands with a warmth that was, to anyone watching carefully, approximately 1 degree too familiar. "How well you look, and how industrious. I understand you have been quite the châtelaine in His Grace's absence. One can only admire such dedication to a house one is known for so short a time." Imogen received her with the courtesy the visit required and the reserve it deserved. She rang for tea. She inquired after Lady Prentice's health. She gave no indication that she had registered the precise calibration of the compliment, the word châtelaine, deployed with its faint suggestion of a servant playing at mistress, the emphasis on so short a time, designed to remind everyone in the room that Imogen Carver was a newcomer and Lady Prentice was not. Dominic entered the drawing room 10 minutes into the visit and found Lady Prentice seated in the chair nearest the fire, speaking with the easy fluency of a woman entirely at home. She greeted him with the particular warmth she had always shown him, a warmth that was not inappropriate, never quite inappropriate, but which carried the unmistakable frequency of a woman who considered herself an intimate. "Dominic," she said, using his Christian name as she always had, as a neighbor of long-standing might. "How wonderful to have you home at last. We've all missed you dreadfully. Your poor Duchess most of all, I am sure. Though she bears it so well, one can hardly tell." Imogen poured the tea and said nothing. He watched her. He had been watching her for 6 days now, and he had begun to notice the things she chose not to say. She did not correct Lady Prentice's use of his Christian name. She did not respond to the implication that she had been lonely or that her composure was a performance. She simply poured the tea, offered the sugar, and allowed Lady Prentice the full breadth of her performance without providing either audience or obstacle. It was, he realized, devastating. Lady Prentice required resistance to function. Without it, her remarks fell into the silence of the room and lay there, exposed. He accepted his tea from his wife's hand and noticed, because he was noticing everything now, that she poured his with no cream and placed the cup at his right, exactly as she had on that first morning. She had been paying attention to him for 8 months before he arrived. He had been paying attention to her for 6 days. The asymmetry shamed him in a way he could not articulate and did not try to. The dinner came 10 days after his return. Neighbors, the Whitfords, Sir Edmund Lacey, the Reverend and Mrs. Price, and Lady Prentice, who had accepted with alacrity. Imogen managed the arrangements with the quiet authority she brought to everything, consulting Mrs. Cope on the menu and the seating and the particular claret that the Whitfords preferred, and doing it all with a competence so seamless that it was only afterwards, reviewing the evening in his memory, that Dominic understood how much she had anticipated and prevented. The table was set for 12. The candles were beeswax, not tallow, and they filled the dining room with a warm gold light that caught the crystal and the silver and the white cloth. Imogen wore an evening dress of pale blue silk, high-waisted, with a strand of seed pearls at her throat, the first time he had seen her in anything other than gray, and the effect was so striking that he paused in the doorway and had to remind himself to enter the room. The conversation moved as dinners moved: politics, the harvest, the latest news from London. Lady Prentice, seated across from Imogen, directed her remarks primarily to the Duke, referencing events and acquaintances from before the marriage with the practiced ease of someone establishing territory. Dominic answered politely and briefly. He was watching his wife. Imogen was listening to Sir Edmund describe a drainage problem on his land with the genuine attention of someone who understood drainage problems. She asked a question, specific, practical, informed, and Sir Edmund looked at her with the startled respect of a man who had not expected the Duchess to know anything about culverts. It was between the second and third course that Lady Prentice made her remark. "I must confess," she said, touching her wineglass with one finger in a gesture of elegant casualness, "I have wondered how the Duchess finds Stonebridge after so many months alone here, such a vast house, and without company for so long. One imagines it must have been rather like being a housekeeper, managing all these affairs without the Duke in residence." The table quieted. Not dramatically, not the way a table quiets after a visible insult, but with the subtle recalibration that occurs when people sense that something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Mrs. Price looked at her plate. Sir Edmund cleared his throat. Imogen set down her fork. She did not look at Lady Prentice. She looked at her plate with the same composed expression she wore for everything, and waited. She was not going to respond. She never responded. That was her power, and everyone at the table, including Lady Prentice, knew it. Dominic spoke. "I find," he said, and his voice was quiet, the particular quietness of a man who has decided something and does not require volume to communicate it, "that my wife has been rather more than a housekeeper." She identified the failure in the East Wing lead, flashing that 3 separate estimates had missed. She renegotiated terms with 2 suppliers and saved the estate £43 per quarter. She settled a boundary dispute that had been unresolved for 3 years. He paused. He looked at Imogen. "I should like very much after dinner if you would show me the work you arranged on the East Wing roof. I have not yet seen it properly." The specificity landed. Not a declaration of love, not a speech, not a public correction, but something more precise and for that reason, more devastating. He knew what she had done. He had been paying attention. The table heard it. Lady Prentice heard it. Imogen met his eye across the candles. That trace of amusement, the same expression from the first morning, the coffee, the sideboard, flickered at the corners of her mouth. "Of course, Your Grace," she said, "though I should warn you, the attic stairs are steep and I cannot guarantee the state of your boots." Sir Edmund laughed. Mrs. Price smiled. The Reverend reached for the claret. The dinner continued, and Lady Prentice, for the first time in Dominic's memory, did not speak again until dessert. After the guests departed, they stood together in the hall. The candles were burning low, and the house was settling into its nighttime sounds: the creak of timber, the murmur of staff in the kitchen corridor, the wind against the windows. "You did not need to say that," Imogen said. "I know." The roof flashing was not especially heroic. It was competent. I find I value competence more than heroism at present. She looked at him. In the low light of the hall, with the pale blue silk and the seed pearls and the expression that he was learning to read as the one she wore when she was deciding whether to say something she had been thinking for a long time, she looked like a woman he wanted to know. Not the portrait in the drawer, not the efficient handwriting on 14 letters about drainage and roof timbers. The woman herself, specific, particular, irreplaceable. "You asked me to bring you coffee," she said. "I did. I considered telling you. Why did you not?" She paused, and it was the first time he had seen her pause, the first crack in the composure, or rather the first deliberate lowering of it, which was not the same thing. "Because I wanted to see what you would do when you found out for yourself, whether you would be embarrassed or whether you would be angry." And you were embarrassed. It was. she said with that faint, precise amusement. The correct response. He did not kiss her. It was not yet the moment for that. Not for them, not for the particular architecture of whatever was being built between them, which required more foundation before it could bear that weight. But he stood in the hall with his wife and understood for the first time that his marriage was not the arrangement of solicitors and formal letters that he had allowed it to be. It was this: the woman at the sideboard, the coffee at exactly the right temperature, the 43 pounds per quarter and the lead flashing and the tenants' names, the gray dress in the morning and the pale blue silk at dinner, and the amusement she had earned the right to feel, and the composure she had chosen every day for 8 months to maintain. In the weeks that followed, the marriage became itself. Not quickly, neither of them was built for quickness, but with the steady, methodical certainty of two people who had each spent their lives managing difficult situations, and who now found, with something like relief, that the most difficult situation of all was also the most rewarding. He learned that she read late into the night, novels which she kept in her bedchamber and did not mention, as though fiction were a private indulgence, unbecoming a duchess. She learned that he played the pianoforte badly, but with genuine feeling, and that he had stopped playing when his mother died because there was no one left to hear it. She played for him, and her playing was like everything else she did, precise, unshowy, and somehow more moving for its restraint. He wrote to her father, not through solicitors, in his own hand, a letter that said nothing about roof timbers or quarterly accounts, and everything about the daughter Sir Rowan Hart had sent to a stranger's house with the quiet faith that she would manage. She had done rather more than manage. He wanted her father to know that someone had finally noticed. Lady Prentice continued to call, as neighbors must, but the dynamic had shifted in the way that dynamics shift when the ground beneath them is no longer contested. Imogen received her with courtesy. Dominic received her with politeness. The particular warmth, the Christian name deployed with intimate ease, found no purchase in a house where the Duke and Duchess breakfasted together every morning and walked the grounds every afternoon and sat together in the drawing room every evening with the comfortable silence of two people who had discovered to their mutual and slightly surprised satisfaction that they preferred each other's company to anyone else's. Aldous, who noticed everything and said little, remarked to Mrs. Cope that the house had settled. Mrs. Cope, who had watched Imogen arrive 8 months ago with a single trunk and a letter of introduction that the Duke had not bothered to answer personally, allowed herself the satisfaction of agreeing. Spring came early. The east wing roof held, the tenants prospered, the household accounts under Imogen's continued oversight remained exemplary. Dominic sat in the House of Lords when duty required and came home when it did not, which was more often than any Duke of Stonebridge had come home in living memory. He brought her books from London, novels chosen with the attentive specificity of a man who had learned that his wife preferred Gothic romances to moral tales, and who found this preference, like everything else about her, both surprising and entirely consistent. Their son arrived the following winter, a healthy boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's grave expression, whom they named after no one in particular. Imogen had suggested the name. Dominic had agreed. Mrs. Cope had wept, which she would deny to anyone who asked. 2 years after that, a daughter. The nursery, which had been silent for a generation, filled with the sounds that nurseries are meant to hold, and the east wing, repaired, solid, the lead flashing gleaming in the rain, sheltered them all. On a morning 6 years after the first, Dominic came down early and found her at the sideboard. She was wearing gray, a different gray, a fine wool rather than muslin, but the same simplicity, the same practical elegance. She was checking the coffee pot. She glanced at him, and the amusement was there, as it always was, at the corners of her mouth. "Shall I pour, Your Grace?" she asked. "You know very well that I have learned to pour my own coffee." "You still overfill the cup." "That is a matter of preference, not incompetence." "It is a matter," she said, taking the pot from him and pouring with her customary steadiness, "of the saucer." He watched her. She was 31 now. The dark hair was pinned as simply as ever. The composure was unchanged, not because she felt nothing, but because she had chosen, long ago, a way of carrying what she felt that did not require display. He loved her for it. He had loved her, he suspected, from the moment she set the coffee cup at his right hand and looked at him with that expression he could not read, though he had spent 6 years reading it since and had become, if not fluent, at least conversant. He had asked her once, only once, why she had not told him who she was in that first moment. She had said, "I wanted to know what you would do when you found out for yourself." He had not yet thought of an adequate answer. She knew this. He could see it in the amusement, in the steady hand, in the coffee poured without a splash. She found it satisfying. He found that he did not mind. The breakfast room filled with light. Somewhere in the nursery above, their son was arguing with his sister about something that would be forgotten by luncheon. Mrs. Cope was in the kitchen corridor giving the morning's instructions. Aldous was in the estate office, reviewing the quarterly figures that were, as always, exact. The east wing roof held, the lead flashing gleamed. The coffee was precisely the right temperature, and the Duchess of Stonebridge set the cup at his right hand and sat down across from him and opened her correspondence. And the morning began as every morning began, quietly, competently, with the particular grace of a house that was, at last, entirely itself. They arrive here, like a letter opened for the first time, though it has been waiting all along, whenever they are ready.